I'm Rachel Dalton, about to turn 27 this year, and I've been happily married for 5 years. My son Tom just celebrated his 4th birthday. Initially I worked full-time after tying the knot, but now I balance part-time work at the same company. My husband Mark is 30 years old, 3 years my senior. Our journey from dating to marriage was initiated by Mark's passionate advances, but post-marriage I observed the shift in his demeanor towards a more dominating side. Mark has a 20-year-old sister named Tina Dalton, and their age gap seems to contribute to a somewhat indulgent relationship on Mark's part. Before marriage I didn't mind Tina's frequent visits and assumed they got along well. However, after tying the knot I started noticing changes in her behavior. Tina often drops by unannounced at any time and expects to be served without ever bringing a token of appreciation. Mark, rather than addressing the situation, expects me to accommodate her demands. Tina acts as though I'm invisible, addressing only Mark with a casual "brother, I'm here again." Despite not preparing for an additional guest, I end up serving dinner to Tina. Mark, instead of understanding, blames me aloud, insisting I should have been more considerate. Despite Tina's verbal apologies, it's evident she relishes Mark's preferential treatment. Left with leftovers, I prepare my own meal while Mark and Tina continue their chat on the sofa, leaving the dining table messy. They never acknowledge Tom or me, treating us more like hired help than family. One evening, as I'm about to take a bath with Tom, Mark interrupts, loudly instructing me to buy a cake for Tina. Despite it being late, Tina insists on having it immediately. Mark blames me for delaying, and feeling compelled, I reluctantly head to the cake shop with Tom in tow. Overhearing their conversation, I learned they're criticizing me for being inconsiderate and questioning the decision to marry me. Meanwhile, Tom, though unable to grasp the words, senses tension in our relationship. Suppressing my emotions, I ask him about his cake preference, and he cheerfully requests one with lots of fruits. Our trip to the cake shop was filled with discussions about cakes. Momentarily pushing aside Mark's early words, Tom and I arrived just before closing time. Fortunately, finding the cake Tina desired, we purchased 2 cakes, including the fruit-loaded one Tom wanted back home. I served the cakes to Tina and Mark, then prepared Tom's cake and headed to the dining room. The moment I placed it in front of Tom, Tina pointed and expressed her desire for that cake. Before I could react, Mark moved Tom's chosen cake in front of Tina. Disregarding Tom's protests, Mark justified his action, claiming he bought the cake with his earnings and had the right to choose for Tom. Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I voiced my dissatisfaction. In response, Mark threatened with divorce. Tom, who had stopped crying, anxiously held my hand and then, after some thought, said, "Mom, and also love cake with strawberries on it." "Yes, it's really delicious." He mentioned this while eating a cake initially wanted by Tina. Feeling that Tom was enduring too much, I lifted his cake plate. When I saw Tina reaching for it, I took Tom to the next room so he could enjoy his cake in peace. Mark apologized to Tina, claiming he was sorry for being stingy. Despite wanting to retort, I held back for Tom's sake. Watching Tom innocently enjoy his cake was a heartwarming sight. After finishing the cake, we decided to have a late bath and sleep in Tom's bed. The next morning, I discovered Tina had already left. As I prepared breakfast, I heard Tom crying. Shockingly, his piggy bank, a gift from my father, was broken and the saved money was gone. Tom, who always said good night to the piggy bank, was left heartbroken. When I questioned Mark about it, he casually mentioned that Tina needed some money, so she took it from the piggy bank. Holding a crying and shaking Tom, I felt his pain so acutely that I cried with him. It was painful to witness. Mark prioritizing and caring for his sister more than our son. Expressing my anger and sadness, I confronted Mark, breaking my usual silence on arguments in front of Tom. Mark, without a word, went to the bedroom and returned with something shocking in hand: divorce papers. I discovered the hidden divorce papers that Mark had tucked away somewhere I didn't know. In a sudden burst, he confronted me, shoving the papers at me before storming out of the house with a loud bang. Tom, who had never cried over the issues with Mark and Tina, seemed to have reached his limit, crying since last night. Unable to bear seeing Tom so hurt, I suggested skipping day our care for the day, and he happily agreed with a loud yes, showing a faint smile. We spent the day playing and bonding, with Tom bringing a picture book from the shelf, sitting on my lap, and happily remarking, "The teacher at the nursery today was Mama, right? He looks like an angel." His little heart seemed filled with patience, and I decided to make the day special by taking a day off from work despite causing potential trouble at my workplace. They kindly understood the situation and granted me a day off. In the morning, we visited the park, played hide and seek, and had fun in the sandbox and on the slide. When we returned home for lunch, Tom appeared sleepy, usually napping by himself, but today he fell asleep on my lap like when he was a baby. Though I initially thought of doing household chores during his nap, I decided that today was special. Instead, I allowed myself to be healed by his peaceful sleeping face and gentle breathing. However, my serene moment was abruptly interrupted by a noise from the entrance, indicating the front door had opened. As it wasn't Mark's usual time to come home, I became suspicious and quickly hid in the bedroom closet, clutching Tom. A voice echoed through the house, and to my surprise it was Tina. Trembling with fear, I listened as she searched for something, expressing frustration over not finding it. Tina then made a phone call mentioning Mark and discussing their unsuccessful search. After hearing her lock the front door and leave, I put Tom to bed and contemplated the strange events. I couldn't comprehend why Tina had entered the house and what they were looking for. Suddenly Mark seemed like a stranger, and I felt a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Swiftly packing essentials for Tom and myself, we headed to the station and took a train to my parents' house. Fortunately, their home was nearby, just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, my parents sensed something from my expression and welcomed us without asking questions. I shared the entire ordeal with them, including my fear of staying at our house due to Mark and Tina's actions. Upon hearing my mother's suggestion that Tina might have been looking for my belongings, possibly cash cards, I recall my past experience as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. I had entrusted the company to friends when I decided to prioritize raising my child after getting married. Although I still worked part-time and communicated with the company from home, Mark was unaware that I was still the CEO. I discovered the hidden divorce papers that Mark had tucked away, suspecting that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. While I've mentioned to him that I still receive some assistance from the company, I've deliberately kept the details about being the CEO and my savings private. This secrecy stems from realizing early in our marriage that Mark struggles with managing money and tends to spend everything he earns. Mark at first provided only $2,000 a month for food expenses and even suggested I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. However, with the financial strain of raising Tom and only $200 for food, I never agreed to be a full-time housewife. Eventually, he reluctantly allowed me to work part-time, and to ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he had me sign a post-marital property waiver through a Lawyer. Since Tom's birth I used my savings for his nursery fees and clothes, as I've only received $200 for food. I've never asked Mark for additional funds beyond the food budget, leading him to believe I have savings. Considering Tina's apparent need for money and Mark's perception of my financial situation, they might be searching for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account dedicated to Tom with a portion of my salary directly deposited into it each month. Despite their search, they won't find the cash cards, as I always carry my valuables. However, there's still an unsettling issue. Tina might be entering our house even when we're not there, and Mark may be allowing it. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables, including the cash cards, in my parents' safe. As I pondered their need for money, Tom approached my father, crying over his broken piggy bank and the shattered promise of saving up. My father, angered by Tom's story, vowed to call Mark. My mother suggested finding out their purpose calmly, as Mark's mention of divorce might shift blame to us, making the divorce more favorable for him to ascertain their purpose. I decided to record their conversation, consulting a lawyer who was a friend of my father's. Returning home, I began cooking dinner, keeping my phone screen down to record secretly. Mark arrived home, surprising me by immediately asking about my cash cards. When I questioned him, he gave vague answers, attempting to deceive me. When I remained silent, Mark grew agitated and demanded all my part-time money for his sister. Refusing, I explained it was for Tom's savings. In response, he angrily pushed the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for Tom. He even uttered words implying he valued Tina more than our son. Hearing this, I stopped preparing the meal, put the divorce papers in my bag, took Tom's hand and headed for the door. Mark, in a loud voice, declared his serious intent for divorce, instructing me never to come back. I responded by stating I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. After leaving, I received numerous messages and calls from Mark, which I ignored. Turning off my phone, I sought refuge at my parents' house, sharing the recording and divorce papers with them. Although I confessed to having no love or affection for Mark, the first expressed concern for Tom. My parents advised me to do as I pleased, acknowledging the potential emotional impact on Tom if a divorce were to occur. While grappling with the decision to divorce Mark, Tom expressed his hunger. My mother, seeing my distress, kindly made in hamburgers, his favorite dish. Overwhelmed with emotions, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother told Tom with a warm smile that she prepared the hamburgers so that he and I could visit whenever we wanted. Taking a bite, Tom exclaimed with joy, praising grand hamburgers and expressing a desire to eat them every day. I responded, saying it's because the hamburger contains the love I have for him, and he, in a touching gesture, took a big bite and offered it to me. Moved by Tom's kindness, my tears couldn't be held back, and even though I tried to stop them, they persisted. My father, noticing Tom's concern, reassured him that my tears were of happiness, not sadness. Hearing this, Tom, in a moment of understanding, hugged me, and my father's eyes turned bright red. Realizing the blessing of being with family, I remarked to Tom that family is precious. Surprised, he questioned if Dad had mentioned that only Tina was family. My father gently confirmed it, but then asked Tom if he wanted to live with them as family. With a laugh, Tom happily agreed, making everyone smile naturally. Despite contemplating divorce, the meal felt so happy that I finally decided to part ways with Mark. The first planned to inform Tom about it, and even though discussing it weighed heavily on my heart, Tom seemed to grasp the situation happily. He expressed the desire to live as a family, embracing the pet dog and calling his younger brother. Despite the dog being older, preparations for the divorce began, starting with contacting a lawyer who was a friend of my father. The next day we formalized the contract, and my father and Tom shared comforting laughter while I laid in bed reminiscing about my childhood. The following day, upon checking my smartphone, I found over 200 calls and messages from Mark showcasing his emotional instability. Exhausted, I turned off my phone, and with the lawyer's assistance we explained the situation to my parents. Tina had accumulated significant debt from a casino and shopping addiction, and Mark acted as her guarantor, planning to use my savings. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted, and Mark sobbed upon realizing it was finalized. Despite expecting disagreements about child support, he signed a pledge to pay $340 to Tom every month. In a subsequent call from Mark, his tone lacked aggression, and he calmly admitted to financial manipulation and explained his complex feelings toward Tina. I firmly asserted my decision not to reconsider and heard his faint sobbing before he wished me happiness and hung up, remaining strong until the end. I discussed future plans with my parents and decided to stay with them until Tom grows up. I resumed my role as a company president and later learned that Mark and Tina had informed their parents about the divorce and debt, resulting in disownment. Today I find happiness being with my family.